Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast. I'm Paris Jackson, host of the news feed on Cascade PBS. It's fair to say that partisanship and polarization is plaguing the country as the American public grapples with many issues, both domestic and international, ahead of the November election. There is a lot to debate, from media bias and political coverage to the impact of political satire on both sides of the aisle. The host of KCRW's Left, Right, and Center podcast, David Greene, didn't mind stepping into those debates at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival in early May in Seattle. He moderated a conversation between the executive director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service, Democrat Mo Elleithee, and ABC News contributor and Republican Sarah Isgur. Now, let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. I'm David Greene. I'm the host of Left, Right, and Center from KCRW, and I am joined today by Sarah Isgur and Mo Elleithee. Mo is the executive director at Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. He was the communications director for the Democratic National Committee and also advised Hillary Clinton. Sarah is senior editor at The Dispatch. She is a lawyer and was the spokesperson at the Department of Justice under President Trump. Thank you for being here, everyone. Thank you, Mo and Sarah.
Thanks.
So I was sort of explaining the mission of our show to come into a room, talk about hard things, bring in different political perspectives, and the goal is for none of us to want to change the subject to what we had for breakfast or run for the doors, or try and yell at each other or throw things at each other, which sadly, I think that's just the standard. If you can meet the standard and be in a room and talk about hard things, we've accomplished something. And you know, as I've been thinking a lot and talking to a lot of people about the key to being able to have hard conversations across the political divide, I think one of the important things that a lot of people speak about is you want a foundation. Like, it's better to have a foundation in a relationship that predates the hard topics that can rip you apart. Mo, I've known you for years, since I covered Hillary Clinton and you worked for Hillary Clinton. Sarah, we've known each other for less time, but we're already happy to talk about like marriage and bad TV, and I feel like that's the measure of friendship. So we've established that kind of foundation. And you two, even though you come from two different sides politically in DC, you met over
falafel.
Food, right? Falafel.
Yeah, so the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee are actually about a block and a half, 2 blocks away from each other. And in the center of that 2-block sort of Tetris symbol are the food trucks. And so if you want to eat at lunch, you're going to have to form a bipartisan relationship.
Or it'll be really unpleasant.
It'll be really unpleasant because that line for the food trucks is not short. It takes a while to get your falafel. And so this was like in the beginning of the age of Twitter campaigns, really. And so we would, be sort of tweeting little political jabs at each other in the morning and then meet up at the falafel line and be like, yeah, that was pretty funny.
And we are still here today.
And here we are. Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
Well, I think, and this is, we're going to sort of, just ease right into topics such as, how about Israel and Gaza? I think that issue, as we've talked about on the show, has tested even the bounds of civility that we establish and take pride in, which I think speaks to how hard it is to talk about that. As I've said to both of you privately, being Jewish is not this prominent part of my identity that I think about like all the time. I'm not religious at all. My wife, who is not Jewish, says that she's been to way more Seders than I have, and it's probably true. But after October 7th, I felt this sudden, unexpected, rage that I had to defend. I had anger about what had happened to my people, and it was deep and it was real. And then over the weeks and months since, there's been this other emotion that has come, and it's this sense of shame. shame that somehow a government that is connected to me or not is doing horrific things. And meanwhile, in our political conversation, we hear a lot about this term anti-Semitism. And I find myself conflating it in a way where I'm like, well, I'm Jewish, and if this is anti-Semitic stuff that we're hearing in some cases, should I be scared? What does that mean for me? And so it brings a lot of sort of a personal emotion that I never expected into really hard conversations that we've had. And I think that reflects where a lot of people are.
Yeah, I mean, we live in an era where everything political is black and white because that's how we score political points, is making everything black and white. And this issue really sucks at being black and white, right? There are a few black and white moments. The attack on October 7th was clearly a bad thing, was clearly a tragedy. And we can and should all be behind that notion. The taking of hostages, and the fact that they're still being held is clearly a tragedy, and we should all be calling for their release. But the death of so many civilians in Palestine is also a tragedy, and we can and should be doing more to put an end to those hostilities. How we get there is complicated. It is ugly. It is messy. And like you, I struggle with this personally, right? We've talked about this on the show before, but I'm the son of, I'm Arab American, son of immigrants from the Middle East, raised in a Muslim household, married to a woman from Skokie, Illinois, who was raised Orthodox Jewish. Our daughter just celebrated her bat mitzvah a year ago. And so there are so many complicated emotions. But for me, there should not be any complication in being supportive of the Jewish people and the Israeli state while also being critical of the Israeli government. There should be no problem with being supportive of the Palestinian cause, as I am, while being completely and totally anti-Hamas. And the fact that Hamas is putting the Palestinian people, they are not liberators. They are putting the Palestinian people at further risk by holding on to the hostages and by waging these types of attacks. Wouldn't it be so cool if our political discourse could reflect all of that?
You could believe all those things at once.
You can believe all those things at once, but it's not, right? People are going out of their way, on both sides, to conflate pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas. And there are people who are going out of their way to conflate anti-Netanyahu with anti-Semitism. And if we're gonna really get serious about this, we gotta stop doing that.
Can we? Can we stop doing that?
I think it is important to think about why this has captured America's domestic political culture war to the extent that it has. Because, to be honest, I do not believe for a moment that this is about Israel and Gaza and Hamas and Netanyahu. For the majority of Americans who did not know where those places were on a map a year ago, and suddenly all now have incredibly strong feelings about it. And so I think you have to ask, why this, why now, and what is it actually about? It's like fights in your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I got really mad at my husband one time because he didn't bring me home pizza. I was very hungry. How could he not bring me home pizza? And
my wife is in the audience, and I would also be mad if she didn't bring me home pizza. I'll say it, yeah.
I told him I was hungry. He was at a pizza place. I feel like he should have connected the dots. We were newlyweds, and clearly it wasn't about the pizza, right? It was about other stuff. And so for me, it's like the Trump phenomenon. It is so easy to get lost in the details and the fight and the points, and to say, this is why we got Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is a global phenomenon, meaning the vast majority of Western-style democracies are experiencing a rise in populism, a rise in the popularity of authoritarianism. And so if you want to explain Donald Trump, you're going to have to explain why it's happening everywhere, not just here. So I bring that all back to our conversation about this topic because To me, it is actually far more about illiberalism, authoritarianism, who has the power, and in some ways a focus on free speech. You know, you talked about anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
I do not care one bit how you define anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is not against the law. Now, it doesn't mean like I like what you say, but for instance, for a lot of people, they find the MAGA hat to be something that makes them scared, or that they find offensive, or a sign of racism or oppression, or fill in the blank. Similar to what they might feel if they saw someone wearing a Confederate flag t-shirt. That is what I feel now about the Palestinian scarf that people are wearing. To me, you're trying to tell me what you think about someone like me. And I will defend in court, with my name on it, your right to wear that scarf and to make me feel that way. But the problem is that the number of people who are interested in defending the value of free speech when it's the speech they hate, where are those people now? Because I don't see them on the left. They're the ones who have been having these speech codes on campuses for decades that were punishing students, expelling students. Remember the one professor who was fired because he used a word, I believe in Mandarin, that sounded like the N-word. Or the art history teacher who showed a painting of Muhammad for the purpose of having that discussion. She was also, I believe, disciplined. So the left has been in that illiberal space when it comes to speech they don't like, words or violence, all of that. The right is too. So you have now two sides that don't want certain books taught in school, that don't think certain words should be used, that don't like labels that they find represent the other side. They both want those illiberal values. They just want to use it for themselves with this concept somehow that they will be in charge forever. It's really strange. Like that we don't live in a republic where we're going to switch which side is in power and have to compromise and come together. It is a recipe to not have a self-governing republic very soon. And so for me, this issue is about those things, and it's why I think it's become so visceral for so many people. And yet we're pretending it's about this other issue. But frankly, I don't believe that it is, because these students on the protesting on campuses, they're giving $100,000 a year to an institution that they think is funding genocide? What in the world are they thinking? By God, if they believed it. Stop going to that school, stop paying tuition.
Can't you expect certain things from the school that you're going to? I mean, the answer wouldn't necessarily be like, I'm just going to stop going to this institution. I mean, is that a realistic choice for a...
I mean, literally one of the things that Northwestern protesters, where I went to school, negotiated for was to stop serving Jewish hummus in the dining hall. Like, that's not a serious thing. And they want to shut down speech on campus because they don't want to engage. They don't talk to reporters. Peggy Noonan, went and sat on a bench and was like, hi, come talk to me. I want you to tell me things. And they're all like, no. They chant things in lockstep. This is about preventing other people from talking. It's not about persuasion.
Well, I want to ask you, because it's there's the question of why Americans are so wrapped by this, but also, I think it's a question of, are our elected leaders, in Congress and elsewhere, should we even view them as credible in helping us process this moment? And I think that, Julia Yoffe, who's a friend of mine, she writes for Puck News. I mean, she held both parties' feet to the fire in a way over this. I mean, she wrote that there's some hypocrisy on the far left, that they will put the emotional well-being of marginalized groups ahead of someone's free speech, unless we're in this case now. And they're saying that, basically the opposite, that free speech is more important. She also held the right's feet to the fire, saying that, under the banner of fighting anti-Semitism, a lot of Republicans are basically forwarding an agenda, A, to suggest that college institutions are these liberal far-left places that are completely out of touch, and two, they're doing things that they know are going to create the chaos that we're seeing right now, which will just feed into Donald Trump's campaign, saying that the world is going to hell, everything is chaos, you can't trust anyone, you need me. And so it's like we're talking about all those things. We're not even focusing on what's happening in Gaza, but yet somehow our political conversation and the behavior of our political leaders is drawing into all these other fights, and it just feels uncomfortable and bad.
Because it is. It is uncomfortable and bad. Look, there's a lot.
And unproductive. Let's add unproductive.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's
a lot. It's not
lot.
helping anyone in Palestine. I assure you of that. No one in Gaza is better off because, there's broken windows in Hamilton Hall at Columbia.
Well, so what's the answer? I mean, it's clearly like protest to me is a good thing. It is good to feel angry and feel like you need to demonstrate and feel like you need to try and bring change. Like that all feels good to me. But somehow everything rotten about our politics today is making the way this issue is playing out rotten in a way too.
Look, my problem, I'm with you. I think the most consequential advances we have made in our republic have come on the heels of a real protest movement. My problem with this protest movement is I don't get them. I don't get what they're trying to accomplish, right? I want there to be a focus on the plight of the Palestinian people. But I look at what's happening on college campuses, and I don't get how they are actually accomplishing that. There are other ways and other places to do it more productively. I look at images of people sitting on the Golden Gate Bridge, shutting it down to traffic in the name of helping advance the Palestinian cause. I promise you, there is no more surefire way to turn public sentiment against you than shutting down traffic during rush hour. And so they are not winning over hearts and minds. I just think that they could be doing this better and more productively, and I hope they do. I want to see them out there protesting. But I think your bigger point is right. And there's a lot that Sarah said that I don't agree with, but I think we're in agreement on the fundamental point that this is about much bigger stuff. It is about a culture of mistrust and distrust in our institutions, and the political incentive is to fuel that fire, right? I look at, for example, the congressional hearings that took down a couple of college presidents, right, that were led by Elleithee Stefanik about anti-Semitism on campus. And I think focusing on anti-Semitism on campus is a good thing. By the way, we should also be focusing on Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiment on our campuses, because there's a lot of that too. But putting that aside, the hearings were great, but those hearings were performative, right? The next time I hear one of those congressional Republicans talk about the lack of speech and free speech on college campuses, I want to point to those hearings, because they are doing exactly what Sarah said, right? They are actually trying to shut down some speech. What this has shown us is that neither side truly believes in unfettered free speech, right? That is just not a thing.
They want to limit it when it serves their own views and purposes.
To their purposes. And if you want to see it, this is about to accelerate because we are seeing a generational shift as well. Poll after poll after poll shows that when you ask Americans, what is the more fundamental value? What is the more important value? Protecting free speech or stopping hate speech? Protecting free speech wins by a narrow margin. But when you break it down and you ask young Americans, and just look at the results there, in the past decade, we have seen a massive shift I've seen some polls where it's 2-1, young people believing that stopping hate speech is more important than protecting free speech. Regardless of where you are on that, like, you have to acknowledge that is going to be a fundamental sea change in how we practice democracy if those young people continue to carry that belief into positions of leadership when they achieve them.
The problem is they want to also be the ones who get to define what the hate speech is. They don't want someone else to get to define that. They're not going to like that. And then this is how you end up in the place of free speech. No one likes speech that they find offensive and that they personally disagree with and hate. That's the reason we have free speech, though, is because who gets to decide whose speech is good, whose speech is hate speech? And if you can't agree on who you want making that decision for you, is it the president? How about a Republican president? How about a Democratic president? Is it Congress? They don't seem very good at getting anything done. So if you can't agree on who's going to do it, then you end up in the same place, free speech, and protecting the speech that you hate most. And these students are violating free speech. The encampments, for instance, let's just talk about the law for a second. The encampments violate the free speech rights of the other students on campus who also have a right to protest, who also have a right to have their voices heard. When you refuse to abide by the permitting process, by time, place, and manner restrictions, time, you can't protest at 10 p.m. because people need to sleep. Manner, you can't use a bullhorn and disrupt class. Place, you can't do it in a class. You can't take over a hall. That's protecting the free speech rights of other students. And the universities aren't willing to enforce that against the stuff they agree with, frankly, and they're violating their First Amendment rights of their other students. There's massive lawsuits being filed across the country. And in the end, I just think we're gonna end up in the same place that, nope, it turns out you do have to protect free speech because we can't agree on what that hate speech is. Because if you think MAGA is hate speech, then you're gonna have to think that the Palestinian scarves are hate speech. Oh, you don't wanna agree on that? Then we're just going to have to agree to disagree and let both thrive.
Well, let's talk about the kind of government we want. That's a perfect segue to talk about free speech and democracy, because I am one who believes that the shape of our democracy, maybe the existence of our democracy, is on the ballot in a certain election that is coming this November. And I want to turn to that. Specifically, I want to ask you both how the media should cover this election in a way that best serves the American public and news consumers. Because I watch coverage, for example, of Donald Trump's current trial in New York, and that I am a firm believer in our judicial system holding people in power accountable, and Donald Trump should be at the top of that list. And so informing people about what is happening is important, but there are bigger stakes here. And I mean, I lived as a journalist through 2016, and every single tweet that came out of Donald Trump's account, I was at Morning Edition at NPR, we needed to have a newsroom meeting about whether we should do a 4-minute segment on it. That's not the way to cover this election. I think we need to do something better. We need to convey the stakes in a way that doesn't make us seem like we're biased. As a journalist, I believe in freedom of the press. I believe in democracy. I think Donald Trump has made it very clear that he wants to undermine institutions. He says these things. He is enamored by authoritarian leaders around the world. He says these things. We need to somehow figure out a way for the media to convey the stakes of this election. We as journalists can believe in democracy and convey that there are things that could threaten our democracy, while also respecting that part of democracy is American voters having a choice. And if they decide to make a choice, once we have conveyed those stakes, then they make that choice. But what I just described is not happening right now, and I don't have the answer.
So I would agree with that characterization of Donald Trump. I believe he is a threat to democracy. Here's the challenge, I think. In most recent polls, I think it's between 70 to 80% of Americans believe that democracy is either not working for them or just under direct threat, under direct assault. Right? They don't believe democracy is working. Between 70 and 80%. You know what that means? You got to have a lot of Democrats, independents, and Republicans who believe that, and they don't believe it for the same reason. The people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, in their minds, in their sense of reality, believed they were the patriots defending democracy. So that's problem number one, is what's our baseline for the conversation on why democracy is under assault? Number two, I agree that the press has a role to play in this. The problem is, for a significant portion of Americans, across all parties, the press is seen as one of the threats to democracy. The press is seen as part of the problem. They are seen as too polarized and polarizing. They are not trusted in terms of the information that they give in. The press is seen as, there was just a poll this week that came out that showed an overwhelming majority of Americans, including, I was surprised, frankly, at the high number of Democrats. I almost expect it from Republicans, but the high number of Democrats who
believe the press is a threat to democracy.
Believe that are concerned about the press's ability to convey accurate information. And so when the people who are supposed to be the narrators of our conversation are seen, right? And that's why are seen with some suspect, then that's a problem. And it explains why we then each of us have selected our press, right? And I spent 6 years as a Democratic contributor on Fox News. I didn't watch Fox News. I watched the other networks, and then I would go on air and talk about Fox News. And the conversation I was having there was never the same conversation I was seeing anywhere else. We're just having different conversations as a result, because I'm not going to trust what's over here. I'm only going to trust what's over here. How do we
turn that around?
How do we turn that around, and how do we reestablish that trust?
I think it's a big problem that the media has lost trust, and I think there are a few different things to blame for that. But one of the things to blame is the media. They have lost the trust of the American people through their own actions, through a lack of curiosity and a knowing what end result they want, which is the opposite of what the purpose of journalism is. And so you look at the media's response to the origins of COVID, or the media's response to the Hunter Biden laptop story. And it's not that they got it wrong. You can't bat 1,000, right? I don't. They weren't curious, though. And in fact, when they were presented with facts that didn't meet with the worldview that they wanted, the ends that they wanted to get to.
I was there. I was curious. I was curious about whether there might have been a lab leak. But everything that I was hearing from the reporting that we were doing from really smart scientists were like, that's really unlikely.
Yeah, and it turns out that those scientists were being bullied and silenced by sort of mobs that were led by journalists, the White House, other places, and it was up to reporters to be the brave ones and to say, that's weird that these scientists are all saying the same thing when scientists generally can't agree on anything.
But why is that important? Let's just say we could reverse the clock. Why would that have helped the media have more credibility today? If I had sat there and said, let me be more curious about the Wuhan lab.
It's a curiosity.
Story.
It's an attitude that you bring to the story. I'm using those two examples because we're all kind of familiar with them. It's not that I think those stories somehow make or break credibility, except that they do matter in the sense that because everyone knows about them and everyone knows that the media got them wrong, they hurt credibility, certainly. But again, you get to the root cause of that, and it was an unwillingness to have the courage to stand up, to be different, to be curious, to do the things that journalists pride themselves on so much. And so look at the sort of whistleblower, if you want to call him that, from NPR, who said, what's happening, the conversations that are happening in our editorial rooms are so bonkers, and it's not what we're telling the public that we're doing, that we will decide who we use in our stories based on their race and ethnicity. You're not telling your listeners that. And look, I think that that's important to have that conversation out in the open, but the response from NPR was to discipline him, and then he was pushed out. Look, that's not
we could get into a whole conversation about that episode. I have a lot of thoughts, obviously, but I disagree with some of what you said, but I think finding more productive conversations in newsrooms for how to address this moment.
Reporters should be the brave ones, and instead they're the ones going along with the consensus.
We have to move to satire, but I want to give you one more second.
I think there are a couple of things that can be done. One, we need more diversity in our newsrooms. And I mean all the diversities, right? We need more people of color. We need people who come from different life experiences. We need more people who didn't go to coastal, elite journalism schools, people who come from middle America. We need people who come from families that represent more ideological diversity and who themselves have, more ideological diversity. One, I think that will help because it's just, there's a bubble. And number two, I've long believed this. The line between analysis and editorializing has been so blurred. We need reporters who can...
Absolutely.
We need reporters who can give us a smart analysis and give us context. But it's become too blurred with editorializing to the point where I don't need you as a reporter to tell me what is and isn't a threat to democracy. What I need you to do is tell me what is happening, what they said, what they did, and what that would result in.
And let you decide.
And let me decide.
Yeah.
And I think that will change how some people view the media.
Absolutely.
Two quick stories that I think are relevant to this and what's actually why there's fear in newsrooms, why there is that consensus. One, I had a contract with CNN after I left the Department of Justice. They found out that I had been married by Brett Kavanaugh, and that they said that was such a lack of judgment on my part that I could no longer be trusted to work in the newsroom there. In another story, when I was at the Department of Justice, a story was going to come out about two employees of the Department of Justice who had been carrying on an extramarital affair. They had been working on the Mueller investigation, and the reporter who had the story called me to confirm certain details that I didn't have, for what that's worth. And he was trying to coax me. He's like, well, just if you have anything, it's really important. This story will help Donald Trump, and so we need to be careful with it. Those are the things that are a problem. They're happening in newsrooms, and the incentives for those reporters so that they don't get fired, like James Rosen at the New York Times with the Tom Cotton op-ed.
I will say
the
your
NPR
story
they're
resonates.
Pretty bad.
Reporters should never be thinking about which candidate it'll help or hurt. However, I will say, like during the Trump years, like there were some truth issues from that administration, and so being more careful was.
But he wasn't being careful because the information was coming from Trump.
If they told you, like, we're doing this because this could help Trump, that's wrong.
It was because the story itself would put the Mueller investigation in a bad light.
Yes, and that is a poison.
It was a shocking thing to hear. And so there's fear in these newsrooms. There's fear from reporters about how they're going to keep their jobs. And it's just social, right? We want to be with our people and liked and not ostracized. And so as ideological conformity breeds extremism. And that's what you're seeing happening in everything, on the college campuses, on the right wing, within the Republican Party, but also in newsrooms.
We'll have more from Left, Right, and Center live at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival after this.
BECU. You've heard the name, seen the letters. But what does BECU stand for? Simply put, not-for-profit BECU stands for people, for charting your own path, for choosing what's right for members instead of what's profitable for someone else, because they are the reason our credit union exists. So we do everything in our power to help them reach their financial goals. BECU, power in people. All Pacific Northwest residents are eligible to join, federally insured by NCUA.
At Amazon, there's a way up for anyone because there's something for everyone. Like Jessica, who completed free technical training programs and is getting her bachelor's with Amazon's prepaid tuition.
Even if you have no knowledge or no experience in IT, Amazon has the tools and the resources to teach you. I've been promoted 3 times, and it's been a significant boost in pay for me.
Free technical training programs at Amazon move full-time and part-time employees into higher-paying jobs. Visit aboutamazon.com for more info.
They always say life's not about the destination, it's about the journey. So why not travel comfortably? Alaska Airlines has the most legroom in premium class, with 4 inches more than standard main cabin seats and more than any other U.S. legacy airline. Plus, when you book a premium class seat, you can also enjoy early boarding and complimentary beer, wine, and cocktails on board most flights. It's time to enjoy the journey. Upgrade to premium class today on alaskaair.com.
Okay, I want to lighten things up a little bit. The night of President Biden's State of the Union address was supposed to be this big moment for Alabama's junior senator, Republican Katie Britt. She gave a Republican response to the State of the Union that I think struck a lot of people, including myself, as weird. She was in a kitchen. She was smiling a lot, but talking about sex trafficking and fentanyl poisoning and the American dream becoming a nightmare. And it turned out the real star that week was Scarlett Johansson, who did a stellar Katie Britt impression on Saturday Night Live. She nailed it. And here's Scarlett.
Good evening, and America. My name is Katie Britt, and I have the honor of serving the great people of Alabama. But tonight, I'll be auditioning for the part of Scary Mom. And I'll be performing an original monologue called This Country is Hell. You see, I'm not just a senator. I'm a wife, a mother, and the craziest bitch in the Target parking lot. I'm worried about the future of our children, and this is why I've invited you into this strange, empty kitchen. Because Republicans wanted me to appeal to women voters, and women love kitchen. Seriously, my husband Wesley and I just watched President Biden's speech, and what I saw was the performance of a permanent politician. But me, I'm not performing. I'm not. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. And like any mom, I'm going to do a pivot out of nowhere into a shockingly violent story about sex trafficking. And rest assured, every detail about it is real, except the year, where it took place, and who was president when it happened. And tonight, I am not just responding to the State of the Union. I am also selling these gorgeous bejeweled cross necklaces. This Affinity diamond necklace goes with anything, and you can wear it from the church to the club. And now I'm gonna get weirdly seductive for no apparent reason. As I was saying.
So I brought that up as we were talking, and I remember saying how, amazing that was, but also I really respected Katie Britt for coming out and saying, like, that was a great impersonation. Like, to have Scarlett Johansson being you, like, not bad. But you immediately kind of eye-rolled and said, like, of course SNL's being, mean because she's a Republican.
No, like, of course it's funny. Like, of course they did this amazing job doing a satire of the right. But they're increasingly unable to do that on the left. Like, you think back to the Bill Clinton running into the McDonald's Saturday Night Live. Like, one of the first lines in that is the Secret Service agent's like, "Oh, don't tell Mrs. Clinton we let you go to McDonald's." And he goes, "There's a lot of things we're not gonna tell Mrs. Clinton." Like, that was funny. The lockbox thing from Al Gore, that was like pretty hard hitting on Al Gore being kind of a weirdo, repetitive robot. Like, no one knows where the key is except me and Tipper. And Tipper, like, goes off. But like, increasingly, again, they care about the outcome. They don't want to do something that could help Donald Trump, because in 2015, was it early 2016, they had Donald Trump on SNL and they felt like they normalized him. And so the result is, when you watch some of these satire shows, they do seem to care a great deal over which candidate they're helping. And so, yeah, they pull no punches when they're going after the right, and it's really funny. But the stuff about the left is more, sort of making fun of them making fun of themselves.
Okay, well, I want to bring up an example from the left, because SNL has gone after President Biden on his age, which is something that a lot of Democrats complain about and say the media should not be focusing as much on Biden's age. I tend to think that, like, it's a fact, so we should report on the age of the President of the United States.
Wait, what's the deal with his age? I haven't heard that yet.
So, but SNL did this trailer for a second Biden term that was in the style of a horror movie, and here it is.
Sometimes a familiar face can be the most terrifying.
In political news, President Biden has said he intends to run for re-election in 2024.
You trusted him once.
I know he's a little old, but he can still win, right? He beat Trump.
But can he beat DeSantis?
I don't know. I don't know!
Can you trust him again?
He's 79 now. Elections in 2 years, so that means...
When it feels like nothing's going right,
Gas prices are still kind of high.
Even though it kind of is.
Why are we so worried? He's done so much. Student debt relief, holding NATO together, infrastructure bill.
But he fell off his bike once.
That's bad for Biden.
That's not about Biden.
What do you mean it's not about Biden?
That's about Democrats not being super enthusiastic about Biden. But it's nothing bad.
She's searching his age on a calculator. She's reminding everyone watching SNL that he's 81.
Can I just say, as a Democrat, that's about Biden, right? Like, that is very much, that's the kind of thing that the RNC digital shop would cut and put out on social media right now to mock President Biden. So,
That's about Democratic enthusiasm, but how does it actually get to, like, when you see Trump, he's a grifter, he's a liar, he's a sexual assaulter, all of those things, right?
Keep going now. Yes.
And those are the things that SNL does on him, but when it's Biden, it's not like they're showing him forgetting things, not, stumbling over words.
And they were relentless on Bill Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky
I'm agreeing
stuff.
Pre-Trump that they were.
And they just did a piece not long ago going after Senator Bob Menendez, rightfully so, from New Jersey for his legal issues. I don't think they. That was me being kind, right? I don't think they do pull punches. But I think one of the things about satire is, and I'll be very curious as this campaign progresses, especially with, I think, one of the most trusted voices in American media today sort of returning, Jon Stewart, right? I'll be very curious because I think, and he by no means has been pulling punches on either person, I think.
And especially not the media. He's been incredibly critical of how people have covered Donald Trump and have said that people are spending too much time on the stupid stuff with Trump and like whether he fell asleep in the freaking courtroom instead of what he's on trial for.
And not what his election would mean for our country.
I would completely agree with that. But, the best satirists are the ones who have their pulse on their audience and what their audience is tapped into and what their audience is thinking about. And,
But this is why the audiences are fracturing even more. You have now the right not watching any of those shows. They're not watching Jon Stewart. They're watching Greg Gutfeld. Why?
Do you really think the implications are that, my question sort of to wrap up was going to be, why should we care? Like, if there is sometimes some sort of bias in political satire, does it?
Yeah,
should
because
we
it's
worry
another
about
way.
it?
It's another thing we don't share.
It's another thing we don't share. And bringing up Greg Gutfeld is a fantastic example. He's now, I think, the highest rated of the late night, talk shows.
Right. And how many people in this audience have watched Greg Gutfeld?
Right. He's on Fox News.
Great.
And he's now
two of you have
the
watched Greg
highest
Gutfeld.
rated. And it is where they're going. And it reminds me of what Roger Ailes used to say when he was asked by a reporter, how can you call Fox News fair and balanced? And his response was, you misunderstand me. We are the balance. That the entire media ecosystem has been hijacked by the left and we are giving a different perspective. That's now splitting into late night comedy and satire. And that is something we need to be careful about.
Watch Bill Maher, watch Greg Gutfeld, and ask yourself why those jokes that I think are very hard hitting on the left aren't being made on Saturday Night Live, on Seth Meyers, and on most of the late night shows. And it's because, again, that divide, the left is the ones watching that, and they don't want to see their side, singed not burned, they're fine with. That horror show is a singe not burn, right? It's a light poking fun. When you see, Bill Maher's whole thing on the illiberalism on the left and making fun of that, like, why isn't SNL doing that?
Or on the right. Right? When I was on Fox and I would get people who would come at me in my social media feed and say, I don't know why Fox pays you. You should go to CNN or MSNBC where you belong. Right? Where you belong. There's a place for your woke socialist liberal nonsense.
And it's on left, right, and center.
Well, amen. That is a great, I'm going to get a little corny. Like we talk about things that we're not sharing today and that being the problem. I'm very glad that we share this space together and I'm really grateful for the two of you.
It's only because he was drinking before the show.
And you're buying after, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm still here.
So we're out of time, and I just want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank you for being part of the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you, David, Sarah, and Mo, for the talk. This episode of the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast was produced by Isaac Kaplan-Woolner. The event was produced by Jacob Newman and Ann O'Dowd. You can subscribe to this feed wherever you listen to podcasts, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. And if you would like to support the work that we do, whether it's live events we host or the in-depth reporting we do every day, you can also go to cascadepbs.org. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Cascade PBS. I'm Paris Jackson. We'll be back next week with a live session with journalists from the Washington Post. They'll be tackling identity politics.